Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Collegian Football Podcast. Alexis, the perfect season is over.
Yep. There goes their hopes for an undefeated season.
Yeah. A interesting week of football, to say the least, not just with Penn State, but in college football in general. A lot of big upsets, a lot of surprising stuff going on. And now that it's a bye week for Penn State, we kind of get to take it all in and, look at the landscape of not only this team, but the Big Ten and the rest of the college football landscape as well. So, it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks, especially given some injuries for Penn State and their schedule and their outlook the rest of the season. So we got a lot to get to despite there not being a game this weekend. So
for sure.
Let's just dive right into it. First, I want to ask you, you were in Iowa this weekend covering the game. What was Kinnick Stadium like, and, what did you think of that atmosphere, and just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it was everything I really expected it to be. The fans were very rowdy, of course. They were excited for this number 3, number 4 matchup, as they should be. The game certainly lived up to what it was billed to be, and the fans loved it. The stadium was just electric. We actually got to go down onto the field before the game for warm-ups, and you could just feel it. The people were so excited, cheering at every little thing, yelling at the players on the field. It was everything I really expected it to be. I was personally very excited to, see the wave, which at the end of the first quarter, the entire stadium, fans, players, coaches, refs, everybody turns and waves at the children in the Children's Hospital, which overlooks Kinnick Stadium, and it was great to be a part of. It was great to witness in person. That was something I was really excited to see. But, with that, I thought it was interesting the way that they handled a couple injuries that Penn State faced. This crowd wants to turn and wave to sick children, which is absolutely amazing. I love that. But then you're booing the opposing team's players when they're getting hurt as if they meant to do it. It's not even like Iowa's offense was running this hurry-up thing at all. They weren't trying to slow down the pace of play. They were obviously just getting injured. And the Kinnick Stadium crowd, they didn't handle that too well. I remember Jaquan Brisker specifically. He got hurt. He was booed off the field. He returned maybe 2 or 3 plays later. They booed him when he walked back onto the field. People take bumps and bruises, and they just need to sit out for a little bit. There's no reason to do that, especially when, it could be a serious injury. Remember when at Villanova on that kickoff, somebody got seriously injured on that play, and Beaver Stadium, as rowdy as it is, completely silent and claps when the player got carted off the field. There was none of that in Kinnick Stadium, and that's really what encapsulated this atmosphere on Saturday.
Yeah, I think you kind of wrapped that up really well. I also think that, first off, I'm going to read Kirk Ferentz's quote that he gave out yesterday just regarding the whole situation. But first, I want to say, you touched on it a little bit, but Iowa doesn't run some sort of up-tempo, high-paced offense where the defense needs a break.
Yeah.
They run the same deliberate stuff that they've been running for their entire existence under Kirk Ferentz. And I just don't see that as being a strategic move at all, and to why they would pull it out in this game with not we're talking your best players too. We're talking PJ Musfer gets hurt, didn't come back to the game. You talked about it. Brisker, AK were some guys who did get hurt and were able to come back. Sutherland, I think, left the game.
Yeah, he did not return.
So why would you pull this out here if you were going to be strategically doing this against an offense that's notoriously slow and is not a big play offense whatsoever?
Which were all points that James Franklin brought up in his post-game media appearance, and he was asked about what the fans and how they were acting, and he goes, they weren't even trying to pick it up on offense at all. They were running the same stuff that they always do. It was extremely inappropriate. He said something like that. But, what Iowa's coach came out and said, what you're about to read.
Yeah, I'm going to read this Kirk Ferentz quote right here. He goes yesterday, "I think probably it's a reaction to a couple guys that were down for the count, then back a play or two later. Our fans aren't stupid. They're watching. They know what's going on. I've been here 23 years. I think that's only the second time we've seen that kind of stuff going on. I know it's a topic nationally. It was one of the discussions of the rulemaking. Nobody knows the answer to it. I also know there There are 2 people in our building who have been places where scuba and turtle are code words. So it goes on. We don't coach it. Haven't really been exposed to it, but our fans thought they smelled a rat, I guess, and they responded the way they responded." End quote.
Yeah, that's just, whether you're a Penn State fan, an Iowa fan, you just can't. I don't see how anyone can agree with what he said or back what he said.
Yeah, no, that's why I literally quote tweeted it, and I said,
Yeah.
no wonder why Iowa's known fast-paced offense looked notably different,
Whoa,
meaning that
yes.
they literally don't run any fast-paced offense or any tempo whatsoever. So that would just not strategically be like something you would do.
Yeah.
So if Penn State wanted their best players hurt in this game, which obviously is not the case, but I mean, it's just, I think the whole thing's a little ridiculous, and Penn State just hasn't ever had a history of doing that either. So that's, to me, just why this whole thing makes no sense. And I think, it would set up some really good drama for a potential rematch, which we can get to in a little bit based on, what Penn State can do the rest of the season. But let's talk about more of the game first, though.
Yeah, speaking of one of those injuries, obviously Sean Clifford got hurt late in the second quarter, did not return to the game, which made way for Taquan Roberson to get his first big game action, and it certainly left a lot to be desired. Penn State could not find the end zone for the rest of that game after Sean Clifford left the field and did not return to the field of play. So all of the coaches and players, especially James Franklin after the game, he said, "We were not prepared for these kind of injuries, and he said, that is on me," and meaning the coaching staff did not prepare Taquan Roberson to take a role in those big game environments, and you could tell that he was not ready. Rasheed Walker even said after the game, he was not getting the necessary snaps in practice with the first team offensive line that he needed to, which could have been contributing to the 8 false start penalties that Penn State, including 3 consecutive. So that was certainly wild to watch. But, Taquan definitely left a lot to be desired. But can you really blame him in this situation?
Yeah, so I wrote about this following the game on Saturday, and it was really clear to tell that Taquan wasn't prepared for this moment. And again, that's something you could blame on him, sure. And he needed to be better for them to have a chance to win this game, and he wasn't. They still had a chance to win the game, which I think is pretty remarkable. And the fact that the offensive line, the running backs, the running game, and the coaches all seemed to not be prepared for that moment when they needed him to get in there, I thought said a little bit about, what they've been doing in practice these last few months, and that he hasn't been getting those first team reps and he hasn't been able to work with all these guys. To me, that's something that can't really be acceptable, because this could have happened in any game.
Absolutely.
And just being able to ensure that you have as many guys prepared to step in a position as possible. They talked about next man up mentality, which of course is, a cliche thing in sports, but it's something that, teams have won championships on after their players have gotten hurt. And, we saw in 2017 with the Philadelphia Eagles, that's what they were able to do tremendously. And
Their practice squad.
just having guys behind you that, know their jobs and know what to do once they get thrusted in that situation. And I mean, that was clearly not the case here, and they're gonna have a lot of work to do, especially if he's gonna have to start another game, which we're not sure yet.
Yep, I will just point out that Taquan did come out and address the media after the Iowa
big
game.
props to him for that.
Yes, I think everybody that was present at that game and that knows that he spoke with the media following that game gained a tremendous amount of respect for him in that moment. I know I personally did, just because he said he wanted to come out, he wanted to own what he did, set the record straight, and good for him. This is a young man taking credit for, what happened on that field. And, the players and coaches around him can say all they want, but, he was taking responsibility for that showing, which obviously wasn't the best that they could have put out in that game. So, I gained a tremendous amount of respect for him after that. But I think that these veterans in the offensive line and in the run game too, they needed to pick up the slack. They were not giving him much help at all. And, this was a game where we really needed to see Penn State establish the run game early, and they did not do that. Again, this is becoming a consistent thing. This was so hyped up, and this is the game that it needed to click, and it did not. Sean Clifford left the game in the second quarter, and he still led Penn State in rushing yards.
Yeah, it's not great.
And he played less than 2 quarters of football. Mm-hmm. So that is not good if you're Penn State.
Yeah. First, I definitely want to agree with you with the fact that, Taquan's a good kid, it seems, and after listening to his press conferences and, hearing what he had to say just on what he can do better, I think, this is going to be a real good learning experience for him.
For sure.
He's going to be able to digest the film for 2 weeks. I'm sure Mike Yurcich is going to be with him the entire time, just looking what he did wrong, looking at different reads that he could have, done a little better. And he's definitely going to be able to improve upon this. To me, there's no way he doesn't. And especially, we're assuming that, Sean's injury could be long-term or even just the next week if you just want to rest him for Ohio State. We're not sure the details yet. But if he's in a position to play against Illinois and he has this game film behind, from the Iowa game to use, I would definitely expect him to get a little better, just considering that he has that one piece of game film that he now can watch and look back on and see where he made his mistakes and see where he needs to improve on. So I think for him, it's going to be beneficial down the long run. But at the same time, like we just said, 2017, you have Saquon who steps up when the passing game isn't going and wins that game for Penn State, of course, with the walk-off touchdown too. 2019, Noah Cain steps up in Iowa City and does the same thing. This year, they didn't have that guy. And it was just, if they did, you saw, Penn State looked pretty bad. Offensively, looked very bad in that second half and still managed to only lose by 3 points, which I don't know if that says something more about Penn State or more about Iowa, but we'll get to that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing that we have to mention here is, yes, the run game didn't get going a lot, which I think we can all agree that it should have gotten going, especially when Sean was out of the game, that they really needed to take it upon themselves to carve out a bigger role, find those holes, drive for those yards, and they really did not do that. But also, John Lovett and Devin Ford did not play in this game, rarely. John Lovett left with an injury, as Franklin said after the game, and, he could have been that veteran guy. He's experienced with his time at Baylor. He could have been, their fixture in the backfield, taking those carries and really figuring out what's going to work in order to crack this Iowa defense, and they did not have that. Would it have been different if they did have him for the game? I don't know. We're not going to know that, but it certainly would have been interesting to see. But yeah, run game needed to step up. Offensive line needed to step up as well, and they failed to do that with their backup in the game.
Absolutely, yeah. I will definitely agree that the Lovett loss was certainly, an issue, but to me, this game smelled like Kevon Lee. It was his game to shine. And to me, I was disappointed. It wasn't just his fault. There were certainly offensive line issues that contributed to the run game. And,
absolutely.
Iowa's front four played a really good game as well. And I just thought that this would be a game where he could kind of take control of this room, especially with Cain banged up and Lovett being out and Devin Ford not really gaining any traction yet. But it just seemed like every time you would maybe get that good 3 or 4 yard run like we talked about last week, they would either stop feeding him the ball or, you'd have a run for loss and they'd be forced into a passing situation with a quarterback who really didn't look comfortable passing the ball. So,
no.
But then again, we got to talk about this defense because I think they played a really good game.
Absolutely, especially considering they lost P.J. Mustipher on that first drive of the game. When we found out that he wasn't going to return, it was I was a little curious how they were going to respond to that, and they responded excellently. They were not missing a beat. Keziah Izzard, Devon Ellis, credit to them. Fred Hansard, credit to them for coming in and picking up the slack on the front line when they really needed it. They didn't miss a beat. Yes, they gave up that touchdown, but once again, they talk about that bend don't break. They did break, but they held up for so long. They gave this team a chance to win, and the offense just couldn't take advantage of it. Credit to the defense. Penn State's defense kept them in this game.
Oh, absolutely. I, again, will say the fact that this finishes a 3-point game is actually miraculous. The offense looked so bad, and they just couldn't get anything going on third down. Meanwhile, Brenton Strange, come on, man.
I know. 2 catches.
Those were tough. And that just killed so much momentum for him. And it also, what it did was they were both up third down. It didn't give the defense a chance to rest.
For sure.
There were so many 3-and-outs, and there were so many punts that you felt like the defense, as soon as they were back,
It's like deja
got
vu
on the
from
bench, they were
Wisconsin.
just right back in there.
Yeah.
And of course, Iowa's punt team did a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
They pinned them back every time. So they were put in a tough spot and put both the offense and the defense in a tough spot, because when the offense would go 3 and out, they'd be pinned back deep. The Iowa would start with the ball with a short field. It just the field. Franklin talks about the field position battle and how important it is. That showed tremendously on Saturday. Like, that was the key to the game. They didn't win. I don't think they won any of those bottom battles.
No, we didn't. They didn't win the turnover battle. Didn't win the penalty battle. Certainly not the penalty battle. Didn't win the explosive play battle or the field position battle. These are the 4 things that Franklin talks about after every game, and he stresses it in his midweek media availabilities. And he said, after the game, we did not win any of these. And, short field position for Iowa, their offense, which I saw this team play, there's no way that this team is ranked number 2 in the nation. There's absolutely no way. I wouldn't even put them in anywhere close to the top 5, to be honest.
I mean,
it was just not. It wasn't what I would expect it. Let's pretend that Sean Clifford doesn't get hurt in this game. Penn State was getting ready to blow this game wide open in the second quarter. There's just no way.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong with that. And I think Sean Clifford, if he stays in this game, Penn State wins, but definitely by at least a touchdown. But I also think that the problem with Iowa is I think Spencer Petras might be one of the worst top 5 team quarterbacks I've ever seen.
Yeah, he just did not impress at all.
He really didn't, I thought.
He looked extremely uncomfortable, especially when they were getting consistent pressure in the backfield. I mean, Arnold Ebiketie and Jesse Luketa, they were putting pressure on him constantly.
I will say, though, and I thought Goodson, the running back, had a solid game for Iowa, but
we'll agree with
Tyler Hinderbaum, the center, he's going to be a phenomenal NFL player. He was awesome. He paved out so many lanes for them and just created so much for their offense. This guy who snaps the ball, which is pretty ridiculous. He was awesome. And my whole thing with Iowa is, I mean, their defense is really, really good. The turnover thing, that's like no joke. I mean, they're through, 6 games now, and they have this sample size.
It's insane.
It's no small sample size. And Penn State was a team that was, like, doing a good job of controlling the ball, too, and not forcing things and creating turnovers. And, I mean, Iowa got them. It was really tremendous, to see. And the fact that Penn State had as good of a start as it did while still throwing 2 picks was pretty crazy. And their defense is really, really legit. And to me, their only thing is their offense does leave a lot to be desired, I thought. And the fact that, once again, it was 23-20 was the final score, I thought said a lot about Iowa personally. But, again, they are undefeated. They've played some tough teams. Iowa State now, Penn State. They played tough teams. And they deserve to be where they're at just because they haven't lost a game. But at the same time, a healthy Penn State team against this team, I would feel very good about those odds for Penn State.
I absolutely agree with you. And Iowa doesn't play, as of right now, there is not a ranked team on their schedule for the rest of the way.
Big Ten West, baby.
So their chances of winning out are pretty large. So you could see them in the Big Ten championship, but you'd have to pick a healthy Penn State team, an Ohio State team, or even a Michigan team. Throw them in there. I think I would take any of those 3 over this Iowa team. Yeah,
and you don't think if they were to meet the Big Ten championship, those quotes would come back to life? That would be interesting.
I think they would resurface again. But in all seriousness, Iowa has an excellent chance to make it to the Big Ten championship. But this East battle is going to be certainly interesting to watch, especially since Ohio State has a loss, now Penn State has a loss. It's certainly going to be interesting, especially when those 2 teams meet, to see how this playoff picture shapes up.
Yeah, this game essentially didn't really change anything for Penn State, at least in my eyes, and I think it's pretty obvious. If Penn State beats Ohio State and they were to win out from here, they're in the Big Ten championship. They're playing Iowa, and if you win that game, you're likely in the playoff. So, to me, while that was a loss, it's a shame they're not undefeated anymore, and obviously the injuries, I think, hurt more than anything.
For
I think they would, give that loss up to be 100% healthy right now, because especially on the statuses of Cliff and P.J. Mustafer, those are injuries.
Two of your captains.
We might be worried about those potentially long term, which
of
course is not what you want. And to me, if they win these games and they beat Michigan State, and of course Ohio State, they're in the Big Ten championship with a chance to make the playoff. And
absolutely,
if you're a Penn State fan, that's something definitely to have something positive to take away. And they'll have a bye week right now. James Franklin has historically done well after the bye week, and they're going to have a chance to prepare for Illinois, prepare with Taekwon or either Cliff as their quarterback. So
yep. This bye week is going to be extremely important for Penn State to not only recover from injuries. They're going to want to watch the progression of Sean Clifford and PJ Mustipher. Obviously, we'll get those updates as soon as we can.
We'll be at practice tonight, and James Franklin will speak. So this podcast probably comes out on Wednesday or on Thursday. So Wednesday or Thursday or Friday. So we should have a better idea by then. But at the same time, James he'll probably use it as a competitive advantage, and he'll probably give a vague answer. But at the same time,
for sure.
we'll find out more next week, I'm sure.
Yeah, but also they really do need to use this week to build some depth. I mean, we saw the depth on the defensive side. That's something that we've known about, especially we saw it from the tackle position that they were able to really move some of those pieces around and still give the team a chance to win, as I just said. But, they really do need to keep building that depth too in order to prepare for some outlandish injuries. Like, should one of your top receivers one of your top running backs, offensive linemen get hurt, who's going to be the next person to take that spot? When your number gets called, are you going to be ready to stand up? That's what they really need to focus on this bye week.
I will say that while you never want injuries and you never want any of you guys to go down, this was probably the best time for it to happen if it was gonna. Obviously not during the Iowa game, but in terms of Cliff, in terms of PJ, you get the full week after Iowa, the bye week, to rest. And you would think that without either of them, you could beat Illinois, who's arguably the worst team in the Big Ten at home. And then you get the whole rest of the week leading up to that Saturday against Ohio State. That's almost 3 full weeks. Yeah. So that's like an ideal timetable for those guys if they're going to be trying to get back. But at the same time, they're definitely, like you just said, that depth is really going to have a good practice this week and next week because it's them now. Like, they're going to have to step up, and that next man up mentality, like we've talked about, they're going to have to fill in those roles, and they're going to have to, like they say, play complementary football. Like the offense and the defense is done for each other the entire year. So that's going to be something to look out for. Yeah,
definitely need to prepare for the worst in this situation. The worst being Taekwon Roberson is your starting quarterback against Illinois, and those tackles that we mentioned before going to have to fill in for PJ Mustipher as well. In that home game, should be okay in front of a Beaver Stadium atmosphere against Illinois. As you said, arguably the worst team in the Big Ten, so you should be fine there. But you really need to prepare for the worst in terms of your next matchup in Ohio State. So that's going to be extremely important.
And, to me, whether Cliff is healthy regardless of when the Illinois week comes, I think you play Taekwon. Like, it's – you should be able to win a game against Illinois at home with Taekwon Roberson as your quarterback. I know you might want to confirm a win. You know how important every win is in college football, and James Franklin will say this as well. But at the same time, you need to make sure Sean is ready for Ohio State if he can come back this year, which we think he will.
Yes.
But having Taekwon play that game could also, like we've talked about with the Iowa game, give him some critical experience because – Sean Clifford has 1 year of eligibility left, but we don't know what his plan is after this year, if he wants to explore his professional opportunities or if he wants to come back to Penn State. But, there's going to be a quarterback battle next year, and they're going to have to
so excited for this.
Evaluate their options. And this is a big opportunity for Taekwon, and I think he's realizing that, and he's going to want to take advantage of it.
Yes. So since we have a bye week this week, we don't have a matchup to preview for this upcoming week.
My keys are gone.
No, we're going to replace that with some recruiting talk, specifically at the quarterback position. Penn State has 2 huge quarterback recruits coming in Drew Aller, who's a 4-star, and Bo Pribula, who is a 3-star. And if you've been following the high school, sports realm in terms of Penn State recruits, you have to be impressed with these two quarterbacks. They're certainly making a case already to really give some good competition for that starting quarterback spot next year, especially if Sean Clifford isn't going to be there. It's going to be open season on that quarterback position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was watched I think it's Medford he goes to, Ellen.
Yes.
And I watched that game on ESPN too a couple weeks ago, and he's just so interesting to watch because he looks like such a professional quarterback.
Yeah.
Just with his size, he's just like 6'5", and he's just massive. And he has such a pro arm, but at the same time, he looks almost like Sean Clifford when he escapes the pocket. He's not the most athletic guy you'll find, but he knows his way like around a football field. Like he finds the right read, and if it's not there, he'll tuck it and he'll go. And he can move down the field, like certainly, like Sean Clifford does. And he is one of those guys that you just look at him and you just look at his physique and his physical ability, and you're like, this guy could be an NFL quarterback. But we've thought that stuff with other guys too, like with Christian Hackenberg, who had a good career at Penn State, but maybe didn't meet the expectations that were expected of him. But this guy, he looks like he could be the truth. Alexis.
He does seem like a really interesting, as you said, dual threat at that position, knows how to use his legs, really makes the right reads on those plays, and it's going to be interesting to watch. He's going to be an early enrollee during the spring semester, so he'll have that extra time to work with Mike Yurcich and this offense, really get it into his mind, know the playbook. So that's going to be he's going to have a leg up on the competition in that respect. So certainly going to be interesting to see how he adjusts to college football and how he performs in practice, which I'm sure we will hear a lot about when it comes to the spring season. Bo Perbula really has also been performing very well in James Franklin actually visited his game. I believe it's
Central York.
Central York, yes. So James Franklin was in attendance for one of his games a couple weeks ago. This kid threw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns in the first half. That is insane. Yes, did not play at all the second half, giving way to a backup, but still, this really shows that, he has a great arm. He knows when to hit these passes, and that's going to be interesting too. I mean, maybe he has some all-star receivers on his team, making some Jahan Dotson-esque catches, but still an impressive showing nonetheless. And James Franklin certainly looked impressed on the news story that I watched to get those stats. But yeah, certainly going to be an interesting battle between these two freshmen. I'm excited to see it.
James Franklin's a busy guy. He knows that. He said he had a half of football to watch, and he made sure he got it all in that one half. He took the chopper back to State College, just like that. But no, it's going to be – they are two really interesting prospects, both like big physical quarterbacks, which, we haven't seen a ton of at Penn State. And – they seem like pro-style guys and people that a guy like Mike Yurcich could really easily develop. So that'll be interesting to watch. But to me, what's even more interesting to watch is the entire QB situation next year. And we mentioned it. Cliff is that 1 year of eligibility remaining. But, does he stay? Does he explore other schools? Does he explore his professional options?
Could take after Will Levis.
Yeah, you have the two freshmen. But at the same time, I could see if Cliff's not back next year, I could easily see a transfer coming in and trying to make an impact.
That's very true.
I know someone at Oklahoma by the name of Spencer Rattler that isn't too happy with his current situation. But seriously, it could be really interesting, and they could have a guy who, is making an impact at a big program right now and wants to make the grad transfer decision and comes to Penn State. So they have options there, and that's going to be, again, like we might see Taekwon against Illinois, and that's going to be a big, game for him, not just to go 1-0 and to perform well this week and get a win, but for his future at Penn State, because he's a redshirt sophomore. He's already had 3 years under, or almost 3 years under his belt, so he's not, getting any younger and is not gaining years of eligibility. So this is a big spot for him, and to see if he's going to be a future guy or not for this team.
Yeah, and if he starts for this team against Illinois, I think this is going to be the performance that people remember. People know that, that Iowa game, he was not prepared for that. Coaches have vocalized that as well as the players. He was not prepared for that game. You can't really blame him. If he's going to start in this game and play the duration, he is going to need to really cement this as his performance to be remembered by. We'll see how James Franklin and his squad are doing after practice and media availability, and we'll have some updates as soon as we can get them out. So for Justin Morganstein, I'm Alexis Yoder. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Collegian Football Podcast, and we'll see you here next week.